everyone. Welcome to Daniel and Revelation Prophetic Bible Study. We are on session 10. We completed chapter 5 last week and we will be studying chapter 6 tonight. This is one of the interesting and very famous or popular chapters in the Bible. So before we get to chapter 6, I just want to recap a couple of things that where we left off last week or last session. So in session 9, in chapter 5, towards the end, we saw there's the writing on the wall. So Belshazzar was the king and he's having a party, and he saw the fingers of hand were sent from God, and the inscription was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. And he could not understand the meaning, and he called everyone to come and help him, and there's no one to help. And finally the queen mother came and introduced Daniel, and Daniel came and explained the meaning, and you know how it all ended. If you are joining or watching this series for the very first time, I would recommend that you watch the previous sessions so you know what we studied before. Towards the end, this is the picture we saw last week, the handwriting on the wall. And in verse 30, chapter 5, verse 30, it said that was that very night Belshazzar, king of Chaldeans. Chaldeans is another name for the Babylonian kingdom. So the king of Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. That's where we ended last week. So before we get on to chapter 6, I just want to talk about Darius a little bit so that we have some background about him. So how Babylon fell. So far Nebuchadnezzar, and we studied all the kings about Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar and all this. So that is about Babylon, the Babylonian kingdom. But the Babylonian kingdom ended with Belshazzar. So Daniel furnished very little information about the actual fall of Babylon, but a number of historical sources supplement the biblical account. So we are just going a little bit outside the Bible to find what else we could glean, because Daniel did not give much information about the fall of Babylon. So the Greek historians Herodotus in 5th century BC and Xenophon supply exceptional helpful details in this regard. So we are going to look at a couple of statements from them to get the complete picture about what happened that night. So the fall of Babylon, the walls surrounding the city of Babylon were formidable. So it was very fortified city, and there were two sets of double walls extending for miles. The outermost system being 17 miles in length, and the outer walls were approximately 25 feet in width, and rose to a height of at least 40 feet. Think about those walls, the magnificent walls. In fact, chariots used to ride on those top of the walls. So for an enemy to just even get into this Babylon, it is impossible. And that's the description of the Babylon. These fortifications were too difficult to challenge, and so according to Herodotus and Xenophon, the historians, the Medo-Persian army diverted water from the Euphrates River, which ran under the walls of Babylon, into a marsh. With the level of the water lowered, the soldiers were able to wade the water under the walls and enter the city. So the Babylonians were so confident that even if there was a siege around the city, they could survive literally for at least an year, because they have the water flowing through the city. So they have these canals going under the walls, and they don't have need of anything. So that's why they're so confident. Even if there is an enemy around surrounding the city, they are so confident of this. But they did not expect what was going to happen. So that's what the Medo-Persian Empire, Cyrus in particular, so gave these orders to divert the Euphrates, so that the water that comes to the city is lowered, so they can have a passage to go under the walls, to enter into the city. In fact, the people, those who are guarding the city, they didn't even know until the enemy was already inside the city. So that's how it happened. So that's why there's a little bloodshed when this takeover happened. Xenophon added that the city was invaded while the Babylonians were feasting in a time of drunken revelry, and Herodotus also related that a festival was in progress. So I think I mentioned this last class. They were having a festival celebration going on. They were drunk, and at the time he bought the vessels from the temple of God, the vessels that were taken from Judah, and that is one of the reasons the handwriting on the wall happened. So here Xenophon cited the festival as the reason the Persians chose to attack Babylon on that particular night. So there's a festival going on, everyone was busy, everyone was drunk, and they didn't their least bother to guard the city also. So that's why the Persians chose this particular night to invade the city. Underneath the wall of the city had been a canal which had brought water through the city, and now the waters had been cut off and channeled back into the mainstream of the Euphrates River. So when there is no water, the canal is dried up pretty much, or at least a little lower. Water level is low so that the soldiers can go through the water there. At that very time this banquet was being held, the Medes were marching underneath the walls of the Babylon where the waters of the canal had flowed. So they're so confident in that city that they didn't bother to even guard the city. They didn't even bother to guard the entrances of the city. So that's so confident of the fortification of what the city was like, as just we studied about the description of the city, the huge walls. And here is a picture I think I showed you in one of the earlier sessions. Doesn't convey all the descriptions that we just studied, but at least gives a glimpse. And this is the Stargate. So if you think about those 40-foot walls, and here is an entrance to the one of the entrances to the city, the famous entrance called the Stargate. Gobryas, a military general, was marching his army into the inner city where the palace was located. History records that he and his men were on the inside of the inner city before the guards had even detected that anything was wrong. Darius the Mede became the ruler of the kingdom of silver. Why are we calling this kingdom of silver? We remember we studied in chapter 2. So Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. There's the kingdom of the gold, that's the head of gold, and that's the Nebuchadnezzar. And now we come to the second level, which is the kingdom of silver, that's the Medo-Persian Empire. So Darius the Median became the ruler of this kingdom of silver. He came with a sudden attack and destroyed Babylon. So we are talking about two names here. One is the Medo or the Median, and the other one is the Persian. So they actually joined hands. So that's why we call them Medo-Persian Empire. And eventually Median was absorbed into Persian Empire. So now we hear only Persian Empire. We no more hear about the Median Empire, the Median Kingdom. So here when Babylon was attacked, Darius was appointed to take or rule over this Babylon, the newly founded kingdom taken from the Babylonians. So Darius the Median became the ruler of the kingdom of silver. He came with a sudden attack and destroyed Babylon. As I mentioned earlier, the Bible does not give a lot of details about how this all happened, because Daniel did not write all the details about who is this person and how this all happened. But external sources gave some information. But there is a confusion about who actually is the Darius. So historical records does not clearly even tell, because just like our newspapers, if you take a couple of newspapers like CNN, Fox News, or whatever, so sometimes they tell the opposite story, right? So just similarly, so even these historians contradict a little bit about what they are writing. So it doesn't mean that they are wrong. So maybe they are coming from a different direction. The point I'm trying to make is this Gobryas, a military general, was the one marching into the city and taking over this Babylon. But then we see Darius the Median became the ruler. So some folks explain that this Gobryas is the actual ruler, that Darius is the title for this ruler. But some other people say, no, Darius was the actual king, but Gobryas was the military general. So we don't have to worry too much on this, who exactly is this person and what is his name and things like that. But we know Darius is the Median who ruled And that is where we study in chapter 6. And again, going back to chapter 5, I mentioned that somebody has to have a first-hand account to give such minute details. And so I trust Daniel and chapter 6 with the details that was provided in chapter 6. So that's why we go to the King Darius when we get there. So with only a few words, Daniel reported one of the most significant events in the world history: the fall of Babylonian Empire and the beginning of the Medo-Persian Empire. So that is what we see in chapter 6. That night, the very night that, the writing on the wall, that night the city fell, and with it the last remnants of Babylonian dominance. And then Belshazzar was executed only a few hours later. So everything comes to an end. Babylonian Empire comes to an end that very night. So here is a Nabonidus Chronicle. I think in the introduction in session 1 and session 2, I showed you a lot of artifacts. I showed you cylinders, I showed you prisms, I showed you a lot of things. So how we got the history, how do we know all these things happened? I showed you a lot of the artifacts towards that. And here is another one that's called this Nabonidus Chronicle. And this records about what happened, and the day that the Babylonian Empire fell was October 12th, 539 BC. So it is, most scholars agree that date is October 12th, 539 BC. So we can get that from Nabonidus Chronicle. So the point I'm trying to make is we can find all this even in the secular history. So Nabonidus Chronicle documents that. So the Medes and Persians then were the preeminent empire in the world, and Darius the Mede, who was 62 years of age, became ruler of Babylon. So when he took over and he became the king, he is 62 years old. I think he ruled only a few years, and then Cyrus became the king or the emperor. So, and then Cyrus is the one who let the people of Israel go back to Judah. So here, chapter 6 of the book of Daniel is perhaps one of the most familiar chapter in the Bible, and certainly is most well known of this book. It is the account of Daniel in the den of lions. So even Sunday school children, even the kids know this story. Daniel was thrown into the den of lions, and there are some songs describing this story. So everyone pretty much familiar with the story of Daniel in the lion's den, and this is from chapter 6. So most people are familiar with this story. So chronological order, I think I mentioned this before. I just want to bring one more time. So these chapters were not written chronologically, so you need to remember that, how we are going up and down with the chronology. So if you look at chapter 6, that is the last but one, the red last but one, that's chapter 6. So that is where we are tonight. But we haven't completed chapter 7, chapter 8, and chapter 9. Chronologically, we are in chapter 6 towards the end of his life. So if you take a look at the chronological order, you'll get an understanding of the chapters and the chronology of these chapters. So the reason for that, I explained, this whole book is divided into 2 sections, 2 blocks. One is the history. The first 6 chapters is the narrative, described as the history of the events. And then the second set is the visions, about the prophetic visions that Daniel had, those visions. So it's divided into 2 segments. But if you will lay out the whole thing into a chronological order, this is what you get. So take a look at this chronological order, and you will know where we are. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the lineage of Medes, who was made king over the realms of Chaldeans. I think I need to go back and explain one more thing before I actually go to chapter 6. So this section is not actually chapter 6. This is chapter 9, verse 1 and 2. The reason I'm bringing this is I want to give you a connection here. So about the Darius. So in chapter 9, verse 1, you see, in the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, the lineage of the Medes, who was made king over the realm of Chaldeans. So the Darius was mentioned there in chapter 9. As I said, this chapter 9 comes before chapter 6. So the description was given there. In the first year of the reign, I, Daniel, understood by the books the number of years, specified by the word of the Lord through Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem, So once we get to chapter 9, I'm going to explain this. When Daniel knew that, the 70 years of punishment, or, whatever you call the exile, when he understood by reading the prophecies of Jeremiah, he was praying, Lord, what are you going to do with us after we reached 70 years? So that description is in chapter 9. So the reason I am bringing this particular verse here is to just give you that the Darius was mentioned in chapter 9. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the lineage of the Medes, who was made king over the realm of Chaldeans. So he was made king and he was ruling Babylon. So this is chapter 9. We will go back to that chapter when we get to chapter 9. The title Darius the Mede in chapter 531 indicates that Darius was the Median lineage, and later in the book the author specifically states that Darius was the Mede by descent. So here we are talking about two different groups of people, the Medes and the Persians. So Cyrus' father was a Persian, but his mother was a daughter of Astyages, the king of Media. So that's how there is a big relation between them, between the Medes and the Persians. So thus Cyrus was half Median, if you call him like that. So Cyrus was a half Median. So that's why we see this Media-Persian relationship. Okay, now we come back to Daniel chapter 6. Daniel chapter 6 verse 1. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom over 120 satraps. A satrap is a protector of a kingdom. In other words, you can call him a governor. If you want to call him a governor, that's fine. So a satrap is a protector of the kingdom. So Darius, what is he doing? So now he appointed as a king in this kingdom, and now he is appointing 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one. So you have 120, and then these 120 will report to these 3, and those 3 will report to the king. So you see the structure, the king, and then there were 3, and then the 120. So, and over this second verse, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. So this king he's a brilliant guy. So he immediately set 120 people to protect the kingdom, and those 120 satraps will report to the 3 governors, and one of the governor is who? Daniel. So that's how Daniel is now even in the kingdom of Persian kingdom. Verse 3. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and the satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. You see this, because an excellent spirit was in him, even when King Nebuchadnezzar was interviewing him, right? So he had an excellent spirit in him. So same thing, Darius also found that Daniel had an excellent spirit in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So among these 3, this Darius was planning to make him even promote him to a higher level, so everyone will report to him. So the governors and the satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom. So immediately they started planning, how can we get rid of Daniel, because king is promoting him and now we are supposed to report to him. So, but they could not find no charge or fault, because he was faithful. So it is very hard for a person who is having an excellent spirit and working faithfully. How can you find fault with that guy? So that is what's happening here. They couldn't find any fault or any charge with Daniel, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. In verse 5, then these men said, we shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of God. So they knew very well, we cannot find anything wrong with the way Daniel works. So there is no way we could find something and, catch him in the act. So the only thing we can find is if we, concerning the law of his God. So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to the king. So I think this group of people, they came to the king when Daniel was not present. So we can clearly see when Daniel was not there, so these satraps, and the other two governors, they all came to King Darius and said, King Darius, live forever, as that's a regular salutation before a king. They know that they're not going to live forever anyway, but that's a regular salutation. Verse 7, all the governors of the kingdom and administrators and satraps. That's a big lie, because they're saying all the governors of the kingdom, but Daniel was not even consulted when they came to the king. So, but anyway, they are saying all the governors of the kingdom and the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. They are stoking his ego, So, king, everyone should come to you for any request. They should not go to anybody else, So that is the petition they are trying to catch Daniel in, because they know that Daniel goes to pray. Daniel prays every day, so they know that. So somehow they had to find Daniel trespassing one of these decrees. So they came to king and said, all governors of the kingdom, administrators, everyone, we are all in one accord, king. So you need to just sign this decree, because we know how to do this business here. So what is he saying? That, so that whosoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. So they even have what kind of punishment this person should get when they, violate the rules. If you remember that what happened with the Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego earlier, they were thrown into the fiery furnace, right? So now here it is a den of lions. Verse 8, now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. I think I mentioned this once before when we were studying about King Nebuchadnezzar, how he had absolute authority, right? So when he says something, nobody is going to question him. But later came this kingdom, this Medo-Persian empire, the Medes and the Persians. When they sign something, when they make a decree, even the king cannot alter it. So that's what they are reminding here. O king, establish a decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. So in the Medes of the Persians, they are reminding the king that, you cannot change or alter once you make it a decree. In verse 9, therefore King Darius signed the decree, signed the written decree. Okay, verse 10. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open towards Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. You remember Daniel, from the beginning, his custom was to, pray every day, 3 times a day. They knew that. So that's why they are trapping him in that act. And now Daniel knew that the writing was signed. Daniel knew that what is going to happen. And don't think that, Daniel might have thought that, somehow king, because he loves me, he is going to spare me. No, because Daniel knew the law. Daniel knew full well that this law cannot be even changed. So Daniel knew everything. With knowing all this, Daniel went home, and in his upper room with his windows open. He didn't even close the doors. So today let me close my windows. So he just did as usual. So the business as usual as we speak. So he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. So he did not change a thing because of this law. So remarkable. So we can see his faith in God. In verse 11, then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. We knew that is why they went to the king and said, so asking for the decree, right? So then they expected this to happen. And these men assembled and found Daniel praying and make supplication before God. Verse 12, and they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? And the king answered and said, the thing is true according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. So they reminded the king, and the king said, yeah, that's the law that we signed up, because he thought even Daniel was in the party, those who asked for this kind of a decree. So king did not realize that Daniel was not part of that group. Verse 13. So they answered and said before the king that Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you. So every time when they talk about Daniel, now Daniel is 82 years, around 82 years, right? So I told you, so he served a long time, decades in the Babylonian kingdom. And now he is about to be promoted to the chief of the governors. What are they talking about Daniel here? Look at this. So you remember the Daniel who is one of the captives from Judah. So every time they remind this kind of a thing that, he's a slave, so we brought these people from Judah. Does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased. The moment he heard that, he immediately realized what a big mistake he made. So the king was very displeased. It's not like, remember Nebuchadnezzar was angry when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego disobeyed his law. But here, this king, Darius, immediately understood what's going on. The moment he understood that Daniel disobeyed him, he was greatly displeased with himself, not with Daniel. So look at that verse again. And the king, when he heard these words, he was greatly displeased with himself and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. So now its king is trying to deliver Daniel. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. So what is the king doing now? Probably he might have called all the lawyers, so all the attorneys, whoever, and then try to, how can we make this law go away, or how can we save Daniel? And the king was the one he is trying to deliver Daniel in this case, because he was so sorrowful because of the law that he signed, and he actually heeded to those people, those who made the king to sign that law. In verse 15, then these men approached the king and said to the king, so they did not let that go away, right? So these men, they wanted Daniel to be killed. So they did not just go away. They came back to the king and reminded the king again. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, know you, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed. So no one can change this law, king, so even you are powerless. They are reminding the king that you are powerless and you have to throw Daniel anyway into the den of lions. So verse 16, so the king gave the command. There is no way, because he tried all day. If you read the passage, it looks like he tried his best. He tried where he can find a loophole in this law, and there is none. So there is no way that he could revert this law. And finally he gave the command to brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, so your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. So look at this faith of this King Darius, right? He is telling Daniel that your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. I think now you just think about Darius for a second. He got this new kingdom, everything from Babylon, and probably he might be listening to all the stories from the past kingdom. And somebody might have told, remember how Nebuchadnezzar ate grass? One story. The other story, hey, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was thrown into the fire and they were spared. And then this king, Nebuchadnezzar, always he had nightmares, so Daniel has to come and help him. Somebody might have told all the things that happened in the past during the Babylonian Empire, and how Daniel was one of the chief rulers. And I think that is one of the reasons why he even chose Daniel to be one of the administrators here, or one of the governors here. Usually, when a new administration comes, what they do is they just replace all the old staff, because they don't want, especially with a kingdom like this, because they could betray this kingdom or something, so they don't want. But here we see King Darius even promoted Daniel to this high level. So that's why he had he might have heard about Daniel, and now he's saying, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. Wow, such a such a great statement. I don't know how much he believed that, but he's just saying that anyway to Daniel. Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. So it's not just the king signing on that the stone with his ring, and also his other administrators also, they put their signet ring on stone, that nobody would change the command, or somebody may come and escape or take away Daniel out of that or whatever. But anyway, so everyone now, king and their other lords, sealed with the signet ring. Okay, now let's see what happens. I have a picture here to show you. I don't think this is accurate, but at least gives an idea. Daniel with a lot of lions here. And now verse 18. Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. This king very well knew what happened. He very well knew these other governors out of jealousy might have done this thing. He knew very well. And now he lost his very good friend or good administrator, Daniel. And that's why he could not sleep. When such a thing is happening, how could he enjoy that night? Usually kings have the music going on. They will be feasting and all that. But tonight, what is he doing? He's fasting. Instead of feasting, he's fasting. And no musicians were brought before him. And also looks like he could not sleep well. So also his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. So the first thing he did was he got up. He went to the lion's den, and this is really remarkable. By now, Daniel would be dead because these lions were so hungry, and they threw this Daniel there, and nobody would expect that Daniel would still be alive. But this king, he went there. Verse 20. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. Why lamenting voice? Because he knew that Daniel would be dead by now, but he is trying anyway. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the lions? He had kind of a partial hope, I think. Still he is, maybe his God would deliver him, but but maybe not. So that's why we see him, he is coming with a lamenting voice. He is so much frustrated. He didn't have sleep. He was fasting that night, and now he comes here and with a lamenting voice he says, Daniel, did your God save you from this lion's den? Verse 21. Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. I think, when he heard Daniel's voice, I think I can't imagine how glad he would be. He was like, oh, still he's alive. Verse 22. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him, and also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. So here Daniel said, I didn't do anything wrong, king, so they just trapped me into this kind of a situation here. In verse 23, now the king was exceedingly glad, just as we saw that, so he came with a lamented voice, not knowing, Daniel would be dead by now or whatever, but now he was exceedingly glad for him and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken out of the den, and no injury was found whatever on him because he believed in his God. It is very remarkable that these hungry lions did not even touch Daniel, because the angel stopped these lions from even harming Daniel. So that's what we see here. And I think this goes in parallel with what happened to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Remember, they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. 7 times fire was increased, and those who carried them were burnt, but nothing happened to to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And here, it's the similar situation here. They took Daniel out and they examined him, and no injury was found. No harm was done for Daniel. So an angel came and saved him. Verse 24. And the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel. I think this is interesting. You see now what happens. The tables were turned. And the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions. their children, and their wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. Because I personally think these administrators were also in control of these lions. There may be one guy, let's call him the Ministry of Lions. Probably he might have said, don't feed these lions for 1 week or whatever, so that, when the Daniel goes there, you'll be the first meal for these lions in 1 week or whatever. So I personally think they planned, because they planned so many things here. If you see so many things they did, I personally believe that they did that. And now what happened when these people who planned this were thrown into the den with their wives, their children, everyone. So the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. So it is something like, so somebody digging a ditch for somebody else, but they fell in their own ditch. So it's like that. It's here we see whatever the ditch they are digging, they now fell into their own ditch. So it's remarkable how tables are turned around. And now we see in verse 25, then King Darius wrote to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear God before the God of Daniel. I think we see a similar statement King Nebuchadnezzar did, right? So when he saw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fiery furnace without any harm, so he sent out a note saying that, don't talk anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then when after his the bionthropy, that where he ate grass and behaved like an animal, he again sent out a note saying that, there is a God in heaven. So similarly here, King Darius also sending out, telling peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. So it is very interesting to see how God gets the glory when a person is faithful for him. So that is why we see this again and again. God gets the glory. For he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. I think here we see clearly he is writing a statement proclaiming his faith on the God of Daniel. So only this God can deliver from the power of lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So as I told you, so the first king after Babylonian Empire is Darius. Darius reigned for a few years. He was 62 years when he took the reign, but he did not last long. So I think a few years later he died, and then the Cyrus the Persian took over, and Daniel also prospered in this Persian kingdom under Cyrus. So that is what we see with Daniel. He endured so many kings, like, King Nebuchadnezzar, starting with King Nebuchadnezzar. I don't know, some of the kings might have despised Daniel. That's why we didn't hear much about Daniel during those times. Like, we didn't hear anything about Labas Marduk and, the Nabonidus. But, Belshazzar, of course, he has to call him to interpret the writing on the wall. But then Darius, now we see this happening here. So the lion's den story, so that's why he was mentioned here. And he was also a remarkable ruler, surviving for all those kingdoms. So that, I think, concludes chapter 6. So it's the first 6 chapters, as I mentioned, the history. So the the book, we started studying from where he was taken as a captive from Judah in chapter 1, and now we are almost towards the end of his life, Daniel's life. So with chapter 6, the history portion of this book is concluded. But then we did not complete the book of Daniel yet. We are midway through. We only completed chapter 6, right? And now we have chapter 7 through 12, which are all the visions of Daniel. So Daniel had a lot of visions. He wrote those visions. So the second second set of the book we will be studying in detail from next class. So the book of Daniel mentions that Daniel lived in Babylon and may have visited the palace of Susa, Iran, but the place where he died is not specified. So why the place Susa? Because you remember Daniel was also served under Cyrus. The Cyrus is the Persian king. You remember the book of Esther, so that's the place of Susa, Mordecai and the son Esther. So they were in the palace of Susa. So I believe Daniel might have even worked there in that palace of Susa under Cyrus. So what this says is the book Daniel mentions Daniel lived in Babylon and may have visited the palace of Susa, Iran, but the palace, but the place where he died is not specified. So we don't get that in the book, in the Bible. But the tradition preserved among the Jews and Arabs is that he was buried in Susa. So today the tomb of Daniel in Susa is a popular attraction among local Muslims and Iran's Jewish community alike. So even Muslims, regard Daniel as a prophet. So that's why we still have his tomb in Susa in Iran. So it's a popular attraction among Muslims and Iranian Jewish community. The book of Daniel mentions that Daniel lived in Babylon and may have visited the palace of Susa, Iran, but the place where he died is not specified. The tradition preserved among the Jews and Arabs is that he was buried in Susa. Today the tomb of Daniel in Susa is a popular attraction among the local Muslims and Iran's Jewish community. And here is a picture I found about the place that we talked about, the attraction, the tomb of Daniel. So in other words, what I'm trying to say here with these pictures and the description is they have a tomb of Daniel. So that means that the Daniel is not a fictitious character as some people believe. So as in the first two sessions, if you remember, I covered extensively about the other kinds of ideas that people can bring to the table, that Daniel book is not a real book, it is a forgery and things like that, because Daniel prophesied a lot of things ahead of time. But here is another proof that we can even see the tomb of Daniel in Iran today. So with that, we concluded chapter 6. So let me summarize. We studied chapter 1 through 6. This is the history portion of the book of Daniel. But then we have chapter 7 through the 12. The rest of the half of the book is about the visions, and a lot of prophecy is included in those chapters. So we will be covering those chapters in detail from next week. So with this chapter 1, we have the general introduction about the Babylonian captivity, how Daniel came to Babylon. He was at the age of 16, around 17. As a teenager, he came there. And all his years he served in the Babylonian and the Persian kingdoms. And then we studied about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, his buddies, his best friends. And they were thrown into the lake of fire, but God protected them. And here in this chapter, finally, we studied Daniel was so faithful that even he disobeyed king's orders not to pray, but he went anyway, went to in his room, and not only praying, but he opened the doors as usual. He didn't change a pattern of what he was doing. So he continued in prayer, but God rescued from the den of lions. And even King Darius was astonished, and he was so exceedingly glad that Daniel was survived from the den of lions. So with this, we conclude. Thank you for watching. And if you like this video, please share with others. And also you can subscribe. So when you subscribe, you will be notified when there is a new video posted on this channel. Also, you can share and give a like on this. And you can visit my blog. There I will be posting some articles time to time. Again, thank you for watching.